Hadith number 226. من أتى عرافا فسأله عن شيء لم تقبل له صلاة 40 ليلة. Whoever visits a fortune teller and asks him about something, his prayer will not be accepted for 40 nights. Imam Muslim relates this hadith. This just shows how the Prophet ﷺ is deterring a person going to anybody that reckons that they know the unseen. When talking about an arraf, this is a person who tells fortunes about what's going to happen. They reckon that they have the knowledge, the ma'rifah, the recognition of what's to come. And what happens with this is that since nobody but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the unseen, the future, this causes a lot of corruption for people, because they will begin to then shape what they do based on what they hear from such a person. So firstly, the person is most likely talking from ignorance, total ignorance. When I say most likely, I'll explain that soon. They're most likely talking from ignorance. This person who's gone to them, the client, they begin to start believing these things. Because maybe out of the 10 things they said, 2 things are right, which you could probably do as well when you talk to somebody, right? And the more clever you are, the more you can decipher signs and you can see subtle indications, you'd probably get more right. Not because you have knowledge of the future, just because you have intuition, you have insight, you've got experience. So if it's happened to somebody else, well, it could happen to this person. So you hear them tell you about their griefs and their problems, and you can project those things into the future to get an idea of what might be the case. You can't tell for sure. But if you're there officially as such a person, then people will really look up to you and really believe in you. For example, there's a person I know, he goes around doing these ruqyas and these ta'weed, as they call them, right? I asked a very close friend of his, what do you think of this particular individual? He says, I don't think he knows anything. And yet people think of him so highly, they fly him around the world because they have these certain griefs and these problems and these things that they think are to do with magic and somebody putting a spell on them and so on and so forth, black magic and so on. So they feel that this person can help them. Now what's happened, he said, like for example, he told me a personal story of his, that these people came to visit him because their daughter had an issue. She'd left home, got tired of the family and left home. And that obviously is a big deal for a lot of people. That's one of the worst things that can happen to you. Now the person I'm speaking to, our common friend as such, he's also got an older daughter. And he's also been through such an experience. So when this particular family came to this particular practitioner, we'll call him, right? That, oh, you must help us, we've got this big problem in our family, this daughter of ours is gone and she doesn't want to come back home, somebody's definitely done some black magic on her and that's why she's left home, she sees no sense, she's not willing to listen to us anymore, there must be something, right? They're not entertaining the fact that their relationship had broken down, they'd let her, maybe given her too much freedom, and now they were trying to put curbs on her because maybe she was going in love with someone and she was going beyond bounds and against what that particular family thinks is socially acceptable, or maybe they were just too strict on her and she's gone. Whatever the case is, they're not exploring any of these other options. The first thing that they're thinking of is that somebody has done a spell on her, somebody's done magic on her and she's gone for that reason, so you need to give us a ta'weed, you need to give us a ruqya, something to pray so this can be sorted out. So this common friend of he's saying, he was thinking in his heart that, believe me, in a few months she'll come back. If not in a few weeks, she'll come back. She's got this independent streak in her. I've had a similar experience. I've also got an older daughter. I've had a similar experience. Not that it happens to all daughters or even all sons or whatever, but he was just saying that, he said, I could relate to it from what they were saying. And I could have told him that, don't worry, that she'll come back in a few months. Right? Because she's going to go out there, eventually she's going to lose whatever resources. And friends like that don't really stick by you for a very long time because they're also young and they're also trying to make their own living. How long is somebody going to support you for and help you for? So most of the time they'll eventually just come back, because who would you come back to? You come back to your parents. Right? So he said, that's what I had in my mind at that time. But they came to the Shaykh, and the Shaykh is saying, yes, this, that and the other, I'll give you a ta'weed and I'll write this for you, and yeah, this must be a big whatever. The problem is, it must be a jinn or whatever, and all the rest of it. And just as this person had predicted, in a few months, they came back. They said, oh, mashallah, jazakallah khair, the Shaykh, you did something so great, she's come back, she's all fine now, and all the rest of it. And this person is telling me, I could have done the same thing. It's just that I don't look the part. Not to say that there aren't proper practitioners out there doing the right thing. Don't get me wrong. There are serious issues. Magic does exist. Right? And these kind of spells, they are possible. They are haqq, they are a truth, they can happen. It says in the Quran that sihr does exist. And there are people who really know how to deal with this. But it's important to make sure that we don't go into that direction too much. That should not be your first point of call. Now in England you don't really see many of these fortune tellers. I don't think I've ever seen any fortune tellers or psychic shops, small offices, right? We don't have them here, do we? Okay, they're probably at some, yeah, maybe at the beach or something like that. But in America, it's a business. You will see it in every town center. Psychic. I was quite shocked when I first went, because it's in, all decent places. You've got a psychic there. So I spoke to a friend of mine who has researched this topic quite a bit. And what his idea was from his research is that most of these psychics, they're not as professional. They've got some very professional ones. Now this is his take on it, and I'm not saying that it can't be right, because the foundations on which he's speaking seem to be correct. He said that most of them, especially the startup ones, they're not very professional. They don't have any particular type of knowledge. They're just using their wits. They're just very good at deciphering the movements of people, the language of people, what the people are saying, and then just projecting some of that. So what you'll do is you'll go in there and you've got grief. You just want some kind of help. You want way out. You're not looking at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, otherwise you'll find your way out. Right? You should go to a chaplain instead. Right? They'll give you a much better approach to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than these kind of people. So they'll look at you, and then they'll start saying, oh, when you're talking, then they'll start saying, oh, that means that you've got this problem, there's going to be, and then they see your reaction. And if you're kind of like acknowledging what they're saying and kind of like nodding in acceptance or in agreement, then they'll carry on with that line. Right? So they'll essentially make up what they're saying as they're speaking to you from your reactions. Because a person who is in grief like that is going to be showing reactions most of the time. In fact, they're better customers. People who are just pan-faced will just sit there like that, they're going to be the challenge for such people. Because they've got nothing to go by. So they'll just ask you these generic questions that are there to... and then a lot of the responses they give you are very open-minded. They're very open. In the sense that they're not very restrictive in exactly what they're saying. So a number of things could happen. These are the ones that are kind of not the extremely professional ones. Because the professional ones have something else apparently. Right? A lot of these people, eventually people will figure out that they're not that great. Because you understand the pattern. So then they'll move to another city. And they'll start all over again. And then they'll move to another place. So that's what happens with a lot of these people. Now alhamdulillah, most Muslims don't go to these places, so you will never know. But this brother that I knew, he actually studied this in some depth. He said that there are some very professional ones that have been there, they're very famous and so on. And the way they do it is different. They even do this on TV. Right? The way they do it is slightly different. They actually have a contact with the jinn. They actually have contact with the jinn. Now, you know that according to a hadith of Muslim, we may have discussed this in other places, is that every person has a shaitan with them. Right? A new shaitan comes with every single human being that comes into this world. Our shaitan, every person shaitan is probably the most knowledgeable person, individual, creation of Allah, aside from the angels, right, that are also with a human being. But the angels don't sell out to anybody, right? Nobody can tap into the kiram and katibin, make a contract with them. But with the shaitan they can. So essentially what he's saying, this is his idea, his theory, but as I said that it does have basis. Because we're speaking about jinn here, which is an absolute possibility. Shaitan is from the jinn. So they've got their jinn who they've got an agreement with, of some sort, some understanding with, who communicates with the person they're speaking to, their jinn, who knows everything about their life. But jinns have a wild imagination. That's why you can't trust jinns. They have a wild imagination. They're made up from fire. That's the nature they are. They have a wild imagination. So even if they're speaking the truth, they will mix with it exaggerations. They will mix with it other untruths. So you can't trust them 100%. Even a pious jinn for that matter. It's just the norm. That's just the way they are. So that's how they garner some information. So when a person does go to someone and there is some kind of truth that they could not have known this, it's likely that it's done through the jinn's communication. And as I said, that this is not something I know firsthand because it's not something I'm knowledgeable about, but it definitely has foundation, that this is a possibility. These are the more powerful ones. Man ata arrafan. Because for example, a friend of mine that I know, he had a stomach issue. Right? He had a stomach issue. I'm not sure if I talked about this before or not. He had a stomach issue. He's been complaining about it for months, probably over a year. And he first did not entertain the thought, as correctly, of thinking that it might be something that's metaphysical as such. He went to all the doctors, they did all the tests and so on and so forth. And eventually, they just couldn't find anything. They just couldn't find anything. Essentially, he's lost his appetite. He can't eat. I said, subhanallah, that's great for America, for the West. You don't have to worry about obesity. People would be very thankful for not being able to eat too much. But I guess this was really extreme level. Health deteriorates and so on. So then he asked me, he said, do you know anybody? So I asked around, and there was one person I heard about here in Bradford. But when I asked somebody to ask them, they said, well, we can't do it for anybody that's out of the country because they need to be here, they need to come here. Then I spoke to another friend of mine who lives in Saudi, in Medina and Jeddah, and he says, well, he knows somebody, he heard about somebody in Delhi. He gave me his number. I said, okay, I'll just pass it over to me and help somebody. Inshallah, they can benefit. So his father called this person up in Delhi. And he literally, he said, he spoke to him for about 2 minutes. He's a very busy individual. He spoke to him for about 2 minutes. He said, can you tell me his name? Okay, this is his name. His mother's name. They asked for his mother's name for some particular reason. Gave him his mother's name. He said, okay, hold on. He went away for a minute or so. He came back in the next minute and he said, he's got a stomach problem, doesn't he? And father said, yes, that's the issue. He hadn't told him, he hadn't explained to even a secretary of his or something, this is the issue, or filled in a form, okay, this is what we're suffering from. So this is the first communication they had. What's his name? What's his mother's name? After a minute or two, he's got a stomach problem, right? He said, yes, he has. Okay, call me back in a few days. We'll do something about it. We'll see what we can do about it. How does he know? It's not that they know the unseen, and it's not that they can always know, because these things don't always work out because nobody has control. Now remember, this is talking about the past, though. This is not talking about the future, right? This is not to do with the future. This is about the past. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does give people such insight. They tell me, when I was studying in India, that there was a family of really famous Unani Hakims, these old Greek medical Hakims that practice this old Unani medicine. Nowadays they look at, they press the pulse on the left wrist, so they'll put their finger there and they'll check what the problem, they can tell from there. I've had this done to me and they said, you've got a problem here. I was like, wow, how do you know? Because essentially there's 3 places and they can tell if it's one place it's something to do with your brain, another place to do with your stomach, it's to do with your digestion. They've got this, they can tell. I am told, and I haven't seen this happen myself, but that initially it used to also be that they could actually just lower a rope, and whether it be a man or a woman downstairs, they would just lower a rope out, and if whoever the patient was, they would come outside, just hold that rope, and they could tell somehow through that. Wallahu alam. I don't know how true that is, never seen it happen, but it was a reliable source that told me about this. Maybe a bit of an exaggeration, I'm not sure. But these things are not beyond. But essentially here, this is speaking not about medical aspects. This hadith is not speaking about a medical aspect. This hadith is actually speaking about a person's life and what's going to happen. So you're going to a person to ask them what they think, or what you perceive that they know about your future. What that does then is that affects the way you're going to act. Because you think your life is going to go in a certain direction, whereas it may not be. Right? So that's why it's so dangerous. Because somebody's there playing God as such. And they can't do because they don't have the knowledge. And it's bad for your iman. Because then it takes away your tawakkul. Because if you think you know what's going to happen, then there's no sense of tawakkul and reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you think it's going to happen in a particular way. So you either become a fatalist because somebody told you. So sometimes you could spoil somebody's life with that. Okay, there's a possibility that you may improve somebody's life in the sense that you give them all optimistic options and future tellings. But then what about if it doesn't happen? You're going to crash them. They're going to crash down because they're going to think with great optimism, and then suddenly they're going to go downhill. So it's not something anybody can do. That's why it's so dangerous. Now, obviously, from a fiqhi perspective, to look at this hadith, if a person goes to a fortune teller, your salat will not be accepted for 40 days. So if you know anybody like this that goes to these people, you should tell them no. Right? You should tell them no, because they can't tell you much more than anybody else. Pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tell him what you want. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am with my servants as they think I am. Right? So if you want things to happen, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for goodness, for change, for positive reaction. That's why it says that if you are showered with lots of blessings, say Alhamdulillah often. If you're showered with griefs, say Astaghfirullah, seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you think that poverty is always striking you, this is one of the tabi'een said this. It says that if poverty is haunting you, hounding you, and you just can't get away from it, you try everything and you're losing everywhere, say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim, which means there is no power or might except with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-ali al-azim, the high and the majestic. That will inshallah set you right. Now, if a person does go to such an individual to test them out, to just mess around with them, not advisable, but just from a fiqhi perspective, just to give you a ruling, then obviously if you're there just to kind of put them down, not that we're telling you to go and do that, then that obviously is not kind of an act of shirk as such. That doesn't prevent your salats from being accepted, because you're not there to listen to them, respect them and honor them. Clearly this person is a person of kufr and bid'ah as such, and you should not respect such people. This obviously includes anybody who does these things, whether it's a person who looks in a ball and tells you, right, or a palmist, right, people who look at the lines on your palm and tell you certain things, right, or a psychic, right. So this refers to all of these people. Having said that, there is a science behind looking at the face, looking at the bottom of the feet. That's a different story. Right? Horoscopes are the same. This is exactly what it is. These newspapers, they have these different horoscopes. Every horoscope will be different because there's a different person writing it for the different newspapers, for example. So in one it'll tell you this, but if you look at most horoscopes, they always sound right, right? There's never something evil, oh, something's bad's gonna happen to everybody in Scorpio, right? I mean, they'd probably shut the newspaper down if that was the case. It's always general, isn't it? Right? They're very open-ended things that they speak about. How can you believe in that stuff? You just feel, I think people just do it just to feel good. Sometimes people are in such turmoil. People are in such turmoil, so much grief, so much sorrow. They've got nobody to comfort them. And they haven't found the way to comfort themselves through the religion. So then they look at anything that will give them some sense of comfort. Some people go to drugs. Some people go to drink. Some people go to other things. And, some people are basically happy with the horoscope. So that needs to be avoided.